Adrian Booker stood at the entrance of 11th and Vine at 6:58 on a Tuesday morning, clipboard pressed against her chest, the city of Chicago still gray and quiet beyond the glass doors. She was wearing a black blazer she had pressed the night before, the same one she wore to her mother's funeral 6 years ago, the only blazer she owned that still fit right. Inside the restaurant, the chairs were still upside down on the tables. The neon of Michigan Avenue reflected faint orange lines across the polished floor. Nobody else had arrived yet. She had a key now. That still surprised her every time she used it. Near the host's stand, mounted in a simple black frame at eye level, was a piece of paper, creased, slightly yellowed at one corner. The handwriting was cramped and hurried, the kind of handwriting that belongs to someone who is writing fast because they are afraid of running out of time. She did not need to read it. She had written it. She knew every word the way you know the words to a song your mother used to sing. Not because you memorized it, but because it lives somewhere behind your ribs. For months ago, she had stood in this same building in a very different way. She had not been holding a clipboard. She had been holding an empty tray, standing in the middle of a full dining room, with 93 people watching, and not one of them saying a word. This is that story. Before we go any further, we'd love for you to hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us, and it helps us bring you even more powerful stories. Now let's begin. Chicago on a Friday night in October has a particular energy. The wind off the lake sharpens everything. The sound of heels on pavement, the smell of exhaust and garlic and cold air, the way light spills out of restaurant windows onto the sidewalk like something being offered. 11th and Vine sat at the corner of Michigan and Erie, 9 steps up from the street, behind a door of frosted glass and brushed bronze. It was the kind of place where the menu had no prices on the version handed to certain guests, where the sommelier remembered your last visit even if you did not remember him, where 93 seats were filled most Friday nights by people who measured the quality of an evening by how invisible the staff managed to be. Elijah Morse pulled up in a gray pickup at 7:19 p.m. and parked 2 blocks east. He was wearing a brown canvas jacket with a fraying left cuff, dark khaki pants with a crease that had given up somewhere around the knee, and a pair of leather Oxfords that had been good shoes once, maybe 12 years ago. His beard was 4 days past a razor. His hair was cut short and going silver at the temples. He looked, in the honest light of the sidewalk, like a man who worked with his hands and was accustomed to being tired. He looked like someone's uncle who had driven in from far away and had not yet found a place to change clothes. He had built 9 restaurants. He had started with nothing but a willingness to work and a specific memory he had never been able to fully put down. The memory of being 19 years old and washing dishes in a New Orleans kitchen and a manager telling him to use the back entrance because the front door was for customers, not staff, and not people like him. He had not forgotten the particular flatness in that man's voice, the way it treated cruelty as administration. He had built Morse Hospitality Group so that no one who walked through any of his doors would ever hear that voice, which was exactly why he needed to see for himself whether that was still true. The anonymous email had arrived 11 days ago. No name, a short paragraph, and one attached photograph, a cell phone image, slightly blurred, of a man in work clothes being guided toward a side exit by a security guard, while 2 guests at a nearby table laughed. The caption typed beneath the photo read only, * your restaurant. Your name on the door. Is this still your standard? * Elijah had stared at that email for a long time. Then he had called Carol, told her to prepare the financial audit she had been running for 3 months, and driven himself to Chicago. The hostess at 11th and Vine was young, maybe 24, in a burgundy dress and small gold earrings. She looked up when Elijah pushed through the door, and he watched her face do the thing faces do in places like this. The quick evaluation, the scan from collar to shoe, the micro-adjustment in posture, that happens when someone decides in under 2 seconds how much attention a person is worth. Her smile stayed in place, but something behind it shifted. Good evening. Do you have a reservation? No reservation. Just looking for a table. Another scan. Of course. Right this way. She led him past the bar, past the tables near the windows, where Michigan Avenue glittered through the glass, past the center of the room, where the lighting was warmest and the acoustics of conversation carried pleasantly. She led him to the back left corner, to a table tucked between the pass window of the kitchen and the door to the service hallway. Table 14. No candle. The ambient noise from the kitchen, the clatter of pans, the bark of orders, the hiss of something hitting a hot surface, was a constant low presence. From this seat, the view was of a wall and the backs of other diners. He sat down without comment. 3 minutes later, Adrienne Booker appeared. She was 33, with natural hair pulled back simply, wearing the standard black uniform of the 11th and Vine floor staff. She set a glass of water in front of him, without making it feel like a task. She asked whether he had any dietary restrictions, before he had a chance to open the menu. When he said no, she offered 2 recommendations, without being asked, explained why she liked them, and then stopped talking, which is rarer than it sounds. She did not perform the menu. She discussed it, briefly, like someone who had eaten the food and formed opinions. Elijah watched her cross the room after she took his order. She stopped at table 7 to adjust something on a place setting, before the guest noticed it was off. She caught the eye of a bus boy who was about to walk away from a table before refilling a water glass, and the small nod she gave redirected him, without a word spoken. She moved through the dining room, with the specific attentiveness of someone who understands that their job is not to be seen performing care, but to simply deliver it. He had ordered the dry-aged prime ribeye, $290, medium rare. He settled in to watch. Conrad Ellison appeared at 7:51 p.m. He came from the direction of the private dining room in the back, walking with the stride of a man who had decided some years ago that confidence and authority were the same thing and had never been corrected. He was 46, in a navy suit that fit well, with a watch that caught the light on his left wrist at regular intervals. His hair was silver and combed back, with something that kept it in place regardless of the hour. He was handsome in the arranged, effortful way of men who understand their appearance as a professional tool. He stopped when he saw table 14. It was not a long stop. 2 seconds, maybe 3. But Elijah caught it, from the corner of his eye, the slight pause in the stride, the recalibration. Conrad continued walking, intercepted Adrienne near the bar, and spoke to her in a low voice, with his back to the room. Elijah could not hear the words, but he had been in business long enough to read a conversation by posture alone. Conrad spoke. Adrienne listened with a stillness that was not passivity. It was the stillness of someone who has learned to receive instructions they disagree with without letting their face say so. She nodded once. Conrad moved on. She came back to table 14 and refilled Elijah's water glass, without changing anything in her expression. Her pace was exactly what it had been before. At 8:15, Conrad led a group of 4 guests, 2 couples, well-dressed, the women in jewelry, that caught the candlelight, on what appeared to be a tour of the space. He narrated as they walked, the provenance of the bar, the history of the building, the relationship with local farms. When the group drifted toward the back of the room, he gently redirected them with a hand gesture, a smooth, practiced pivot that kept them away from the corner where table 14 sat. One of the men in the group glanced back and said something quietly. Conrad replied without looking in Elijah's direction, "Asterisk, that section is for walk-ins. Not part of the experience we're discussing this evening." Asterisk. Elijah set his water glass down. He reached into his jacket pocket and checked the small recording device that Carol had given him 10 days ago, a standard piece of equipment her firm used for compliance documentation. The indicator light was steady green. Everything was being captured. At 8:33 p.m., things in the kitchen changed. Jerome Washington was 32 years old and had been a sous chef at 11th and Vine for 14 months. He was good at his job, precise, fast, with the instinct for timing that separates a competent cook from one who might someday run a kitchen. He was also, at this particular moment in his life, more afraid than he had ever been in his adult life. His daughter had been born 5 weeks ago at 29 weeks gestation. She was still in the NICU at Northwestern Memorial, 4 pounds and 11 ounces, breathing with assistance, improving steadily but slowly. The outstanding medical bills totaled $34,000 and were growing. His wife was home recovering. He was working doubles 6 days a week, because stopping felt like something he could not afford to let himself do. Conrad found him at 8:33 at the prep station, plating a garnish. The conversation happened in the corner of the kitchen nearest the dry storage, the one blind spot in the camera coverage, a gap Jerome had noticed months ago and had never mentioned to anyone. Conrad spoke quietly, directly, without any of the warmth he used on the floor. The ribeye for table 14 had been pulled from the wrong shelf. It was a piece that had been returned the previous evening, a kitchen error, wrong temperature on delivery, and had been placed in a secondary cooler before anyone could log it for disposal. It had spent a portion of the night in a temperature range that Jerome knew, with the certainty of someone who had studied food safety certification, placed it inside what the FDA food code identifies as the danger zone, between 40 and 140 degrees Fahrenheit, the range at which certain bacteria can double in number every 20 minutes. The meat was not visibly spoiled. It smelled faintly wrong in a way that a person without training might not register. Jerome registered it. "This piece goes to table 14, Conrad said. "Plate it the same way." Jerome looked at the meat. "Conrad, this doesn't meet temperature standards. If he gets sick, he paid cash. He won't know the difference." Conrad's voice stayed level. "And if something happens, who are they going to believe? A restaurant with our rating, or a man who walked in off the street looking like that?" Jerome did not answer. Conrad leaned slightly closer. "Remember the August inventory report? The one with the discrepancy you signed off on?" He let the silence do the rest. "Plate it." He walked out. Jerome stood with the piece of meat in his hand. He was thinking about his daughter, about the number $34,000, about the way Conrad had filed that inventory report away like a stone in his pocket, something to throw whenever the moment called for it. He did not hear Adrian come in through the side corridor. She had gone to retrieve a bread basket from the secondary warmers, a routine task that required walking past the dry storage. She heard Conrad's voice and stopped. She pressed herself against the shelving and listened to the last 40 seconds of the conversation, with her heart beating so hard she was certain someone would hear it. Jerome turned and nearly walked into her. Their eyes met. She saw everything in his face, the guilt, the calculation, the specific exhaustion of a man who is trying to decide how much of himself he can afford to spend. He shook his head. A small, slow movement. Don't. Then he walked back to the prep station. Adrian stood alone in the corridor for a moment. She thought about Marcus. Her son was 8 years old and had been receiving physical therapy 3 times a week for 2 years, working with a therapist named David, who had the patience of someone who genuinely believed in what he was doing. Marcus trusted David completely, a man he had not known before the accident, a stranger who had been assigned to him by a referral system, who showed up and treated him every session like the most important appointment of his day. Adrian had thought about that many times, about how the only thing that made it possible was that David had decided, on his own, without being watched, to treat her son like a person who mattered. She went to the staff changing room, the only room in the building, without a camera, a fact Conrad had once complained about to the building manager, who had cited state privacy statutes and declined to install one. She sat on the bench and thought for 60 seconds. Then she stood up and walked to the secondary kitchen. She knew the layout of every storage area in this building, because she had worked here for 4 years, and because knowing where things were was the kind of knowledge that made her good at her job. The secondary prep refrigerator held reserve stock, backup proteins logged separately from the main kitchen inventory, maintained at proper temperature, used when the main line ran short. She had accessed it legitimately dozens of times. She had every right to be there. The window was 90 seconds. Conrad was in the private dining room. Jerome had gone to the pass. She moved quickly and without hesitation, carrying a clean plate she had taken from the warming stack. She lifted the plated dish from the pass window, walked 12 steps to the secondary kitchen, transferred the compromised piece of meat to a clean container, and sealed it, preserving it, not discarding it, which would matter later, and placed a properly stored ribeye on the original plate, matched the garnish from memory, and returned the dish to the pass window in 87 seconds. She walked back to the floor and picked up her tray. At 8:52 p.m., Jerome came to collect the dish from the pass window. He looked at the plate. He looked at the meat. The color was different, slightly deeper, more properly seared looking, the fat rendered correctly. He raised his eyes and found Adrian across the room. She was standing, with a tray, looking at him, with an expression that did not ask for anything. Conrad appeared from the hallway. Why is that still sitting? Jerome looked at the plate. The edge got overseared. I swapped the piece. Conrad studied the dish for a moment. Then Jerome's face. Then the dish again. Next time you ask me first. He walked away. Jerome exhaled through his nose. He picked up the plate and carried it to table 14. Elijah ate slowly. He was not particularly hungry. But the food was genuinely good, the ribeye properly rested, the seasoning balanced, the accompaniments chosen by someone who understood contrast rather than just abundance. He made a note of that. Good food coming out of a kitchen run by someone capable meant the capability was there, even if the integrity around it was not. By 9:18, he had been at table 14 for nearly 2 hours. The dining room had cycled through 2 rounds of seating for most tables. He had ordered a coffee after finishing his meal and was nursing it. He was not leaving because he was waiting, watching to see what Conrad would do when the discomfort of his presence became intolerable. The answer came from a woman at table 3. A corner table, premium placement, 2 couples with a bottle of something from the high end of the wine list. One of the women leaned across to Conrad as he passed, and Elijah watched the woman gesture in his direction with the particular casualness of someone who has never had to consider that a gesture like that might carry weight. Conrad straightened. He came to table 14 with the expression of a man performing a difficult but necessary service. Sir, I apologize for the inconvenience. We have a party with a reservation arriving shortly, and I'm going to need to ask you to wrap up your visit this evening. Elijah looked up. There's no reservation for this table in your system tonight. I checked when I came in. Our system updates in real time. Things change. I ordered a coffee 14 minutes ago. It was brought to me without any mention of a time constraint. Conrad's jaw moved slightly. He glanced at the table nearby. The woman who had flagged him was watching. The room around them had begun to quiet in, that particular way rooms quiet, when something real is happening. Conrad turned and looked at Adrian, who was standing near the service station. When he spoke, he raised his voice by exactly the right amount, enough to carry, not enough to seem theatrical. Ms. Booker, I've received reports this evening that your conduct with several guests has been inappropriate and unprofessional. This is not the first time this concern has been raised, and I'm not in a position to allow it to continue. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending a full internal review. Please surrender your apron and leave the premises. The dining room went completely still. Not the gradual quiet of people noticing something. The immediate, collective silence of 93 people who had heard clearly and were now waiting to see what would happen next. Adrian stood at the service station with an empty tray in her hands. Her face did not break. Her chin did not drop. She had been through enough in 33 years to know that the moment you let someone see they have broken you is the moment they stop having any incentive to stop. She looked at Conrad with an expression of complete, steady calm that cost her more than anyone in that room knew. Jerome stood in the kitchen doorway. He had come to the pass to collect the next ticket and had heard everything. He watched Adrian standing alone in the middle of the dining room. He thought about the plate, the 87 seconds, the thing she had done for a stranger without being asked, at the cost of everything she had to lose. He thought about his daughter in the NICU, about $34,000, about the inventory report Conrad was still holding. He thought about who he wanted to be when his daughter was old enough to ask. Elijah pushed back his chair and stood up. The movement drew every eye. She didn't do anything inappropriate. His voice was quiet and carried perfectly. I've been sitting at this table for 2 hours. Ms. Booker served me with complete professionalism from the moment I sat down. What I've witnessed this evening that was inappropriate did not come from her. Conrad turned. Sir, I understand you're trying to be helpful, but this isn't internal. You called it public when you announced it in front of 90 people. Elijah reached into the interior pocket of his jacket and removed a phone, a simple black device, not a smartphone. He set it on the table. I'm going to ask you one question, Conrad, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Conrad stared at the phone. Do you want to have this conversation here, or would you prefer to wait until my attorney arrives? He pressed a single button on the device. 34 seconds later, the front door of 11th and Vine opened. Carol Sims entered in a charcoal blazer with a leather briefcase, followed by two men carrying document folders. They crossed the dining room without pausing. Carol set the briefcase on table 14, opened it, and addressed the room. My name is Carol Sims. I am the executive assistant to Mr. Elijah Morse, founder and sole owner of Morse Hospitality Group, which owns and operates 11th and Vine, as well as 8 other locations across Illinois, Georgia, and North Carolina. She removed a folder and set it on the table. Mr. Morse has been in this building since 7:19 this evening. Someone at table 7 set down a fork. The sound was very loud. Conrad's face had gone the color of old wax. He looked at Elijah, the canvas jacket, the worn shoes, the 4 days of beard, and whatever he was trying to reassemble in his mind could not quite hold together. He started. That's not. Elijah opened the folder Carol had placed on the table. He turned it, so the pages faced outward, columns of numbers, invoice dates, vendor names, approval signatures. 19 months, he said. Vendor invoices consistently marked up between 15 and 30% above market rate. The difference, $203,000, routed through a secondary account your office controls. He set his hand flat on the folder. Your signature is on every approval. Jerome Washington stepped out of the kitchen doorway. He did not wait to be called. He did not look at Conrad. He looked at Adrian, who was still standing in the center of the room, with her tray and her stillness, and her 4 years of knowing exactly what this place had been and staying anyway. Tonight, Jerome said, loud enough for the room. The manager of this restaurant instructed me to serve a piece of protein to table 14 that had been stored outside of safe temperature range. He told me no one would believe a complaint from someone who looked like that man. He gestured toward Elijah. I know that violates FDA food code standards. I know what it could have done to a person. I nearly did it anyway. His voice cracked on the last word, and he steadied it. Adrian Booker stopped it from happening. She's the reason. That man is standing here right now instead of in an emergency room. Conrad raised both hands. This is fabricated. Every word is, the original piece of meat is in a sealed container in the secondary refrigerator, Elijah said. Temperature logged by the storage unit sensor. Time-stamped. He looked at Conrad for a moment. You built a very thorough system for covering your financial movements. You were less careful about the kitchen. The two men, who had entered, with Carol stepped forward, and Conrad Ellison stopped talking. By 11:30, that evening, 11th and Vine had cleared. The guests had been given full refunds for their evenings, and escorted out by Carol's team, with the kind of calm efficiency that comes from having prepared for something in advance. The Chicago Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit had been notified and had requested that Conrad remain available. He was escorted to a separate room and remained there, very quiet, without the watch and the suit doing for him what they had done 2 hours earlier. Jerome Washington sat at a prep table in the empty kitchen. Elijah sat across from him. They talked for 40 minutes. Not about the investigation. About Jerome's daughter. Her name was Simone. She weighed 4 pounds and 11 ounces, and she had her mother's nose and the particular grip of a person who has already decided she is going to hold on. Elijah listened without interrupting. He had learned, over 57 years, that the most useful thing you can offer someone in a crisis is not advice, but attention. He told Jerome that his position was secure, that the inventory report Conrad had used as leverage had been reviewed during the audit and flagged as a minor procedural error with no fraudulent intent, the kind of thing that warranted a conversation, not a termination. He told Jerome that Morse Hospitality had an employee assistance program that could connect his family with a patient advocate for the NICU billing. He told him none of this was charity. It was what the job was supposed to come with. Jerome nodded. He did not say much. He did not need to. Adrian was in the dining room, sitting at table 14. Elijah found her there at 11:30, the city outside the window still moving, the restaurant around them quiet and slightly strange-looking, with all the chairs still upright and no people in them. He sat across from her. You've worked here 4 years, he said. Yes, sir. You knew the risk when you did what you did tonight. She looked at him steadily. I knew the risk when I did what I did tonight, and every night before this one. Every time I came in and kept this place running the way it was supposed to be run, knowing what was happening above me and not being able to prove it. She paused. I knew the risk. It didn't change what I had to do. Elijah was quiet for a moment. You have a son, Marcus, 8 years old. He has someone who shows up for him. Adrienne's expression shifted, not breaking, just opening slightly. A therapist. 3 times a week. Marcus calls him Mr. David. She looked at her hands. He's a stranger. He was a stranger. But he shows up the same way every time. And he treats my son like the most important thing in the room. She looked up. I've thought about that a lot. About what it means that the people who have saved us most have been people who had no particular reason to. Elijah nodded. He had thought about a version of that same thing for 38 years. The position of general manager of this location is open, he said. The salary is $94,000. Full benefits, including comprehensive health coverage for your family. I would need you to start by the end of the month. Adrienne looked at him. This isn't a reward, he said. I want to be clear about that. I'm offering you this because the audit of this location's floor operations over the past 4 years, customer feedback, complaint records, staff reports, shows that the standard of care in this dining room has been maintained by you, largely in spite of the management above you. You've been doing this job. I'm asking you to do it officially. She was quiet for a long time. Yes, she said. 4 months later, Conrad Ellison entered a guilty plea to 3 counts of embezzlement and 1 count of negligent food handling. The $203,000 had been partially recovered through the secondary account. His sentence, pending formal hearing, included restitution and permanent disqualification from the food service management industry. Jerome Washington's daughter, Simone, came home from the NICU on a Tuesday in December, 7 weeks after she was born, at 5 pounds and 4 ounces. Jerome was standing in the parking lot of Northwestern Memorial when his wife came through the automatic doors with Simone in a car seat covered in a yellow blanket. He had taken the morning off. It was the first morning he had taken off in 11 weeks. Elijah Morse announced the Morse standard across all 9 locations in November. Every venue received a revised intake protocol, an independently reviewed financial audit system, and a new staff training module built around a single stated principle. Asterisk the manner in which a guest is dressed is not information. It tells you nothing about who they are or what they deserve. Asterisk the training module included documented case studies from the hospitality industry, real incidents of dignitary-based discrimination, and their legal and reputational consequences. It was developed in consultation with a hospitality ethics professor at the University of Illinois Chicago. 11th and Vine reopened under Adrienne Booker's management in mid-November. The frosted glass was replaced with clear glass, a decision she made in her first week because she wanted the light to come through. The candles at table 14 were permanent now. She had added them herself on her first day. On a Tuesday morning in February, Adrienne Booker stood at the entrance of 11th and Vine at 6:58, clipboard against her chest, the city of Chicago gray and quiet beyond the glass doors. She looked at the frame near the host stand. The piece of paper inside it was creased and slightly yellowed at one corner, with cramped, hurried handwriting that read, Asterisk, don't serve him. The meat is wrong. He doesn't know. You can stop this. Asterisk below the frame, a small engraved plate. Asterisk one decision made quietly, for a stranger, in a room full of risk. This is what integrity looks like when no one is watching. Adrienne Booker, General Manager. Asterisk the doors opened. A man in a construction jacket and work boots stepped inside, looked around with the specific uncertainty of someone who is not sure they are allowed to be somewhere. The new hostess, Adrienne had hired her herself, stepped forward immediately, extending a hand. Good morning. Welcome to 11th and Vine. Would you like a table by the window? Adrienne watched from across the room. She nodded once, to no one in particular. Then she turned and walked into the dining room to begin the day. Narrator reflection. What happened at 11th and Vine on that Friday evening was not exceptional because a wealthy man was mistreated. It was not exceptional because justice ultimately arrived. Events like this one, a person judged by appearance, a staff member coerced into silence, a workplace culture sustained by fear and financial abuse, happen in service industries across this country on a scale that never makes the news, because the people they happen to most are the people with the least power to make noise about it. A 2019 study by the Economic Policy Institute found that tipped workers in the United States, a workforce that is disproportionately female and disproportionately people of color, report experiencing wage theft and workplace retaliation at significantly higher rates than non-tipped workers. The system that Conrad Ellison used to control Jerome Washington, holding a minor past error as leverage against future compliance, is not a villainous invention. It is a documented pattern. What was exceptional about that evening was Adrienne Booker. Not because she did something dramatic, because she did something ordinary. She refused to let a stranger be harmed when she had the power to prevent it, in a situation where every practical incentive pointed toward looking away. She had a son with ongoing medical needs. She had a brother in his final year of college. She had 4 years invested in a job she could not easily replace. She had every reason that the rest of us would call a reason. She did it anyway. The question this story leaves is not whether you would have done the same. Most of us don't know what we would do until we are standing in the corridor with 87 seconds and a decision that no one will ever see us make. The question is smaller than that, and it is one you can answer today. Is there someone in your life, at work, in a service role, in a space you occupy regularly, whom you have been treating as furniture rather than a person? Not out of cruelty, just out of the particular inattention that comfort makes possible. Notice them. That is where it starts. Disclaimer: this story is fictional and is intended for entertainment and reflective purposes. The characters, events, and institutions depicted are not based on any specific real persons or establishments. The workplace dynamics, food safety standards, and legal references within the story reflect real conditions and documented practices in the American hospitality industry. If this story raised questions about your rights as a worker or consumer in the food service industry, we encourage you to consult the U.S. Department of Labor's Worker Rights Resources at dole.gov or the FDA's Food Safety Guidelines at fda.gov/food. Stories like this one matter because the situations they reflect are real, even when the characters are not. If this story stayed with you, please hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And drop a comment below. We want to know, have you ever witnessed someone being treated as less than they were? What did you do? We read every response. See you in the next story.